I'm letting it says it's still connecting audio and video for Ryan, so we'll just give it just a second here and then we'll
All right, no problem. I'm relocating, so.
oh, no problem. I'm sure you've probably had your hands full unlike any recent time in history in the last couple months.
Oh, oh my gosh, it's just crazy.
I,
I'm
I
starting to feel a little better from with all the people having free time.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people need to get back to work. They need to get back to being productive. There's a lot going on for sure.
Oh, there is. Like, it's just the residual consequence, as I call it, is I'm very worried about, like the kids,
Of
the
course.
old
Absolutely.
people,
And plus, I mean, just
workers. Like, it's just, I mean,
how much damage is going to be caused by the ripples of our decisions? You know what I mean? It's so much bigger than just COVID-19. Like the actions that we took are going to, have a profound effect, especially the next, coming few months. And I'm curious to see how we're going to be able to kind of navigate through that time and turn this thing around. That's going to be a lot of what I'm going to be asking about today is kind of like we already, we know what's taken place, but we don't really know what's to come. And obviously someone like you would have a way better understanding of at least how Michigan's going to try to avoid, a possible economic collapse and things that could be down, coming down the pipe.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, Ryan, how are you, man?
hey, Ryan, how are you?
Good. Hey, Rep Bolin. I'm glad you were able to join us today.
Yes. Good to be
Yeah,
here.
I appreciate it very much.
It's interesting. Obviously, interesting times we're living in, but even besides this and things that bring us all together and bring people from all different walks of life together, and something like that in my past was through martial arts and through jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts, and that's how I know James Gray. And just like a lot of people we're seeing in our districts now of people that have built their own businesses up from nothing. Literally, James started in his basement. Okay, he started in his basement and he's built up a world-class mixed martial arts team right here in Livingston County, Michigan, going on out to Hong Kong and China and all the other countries, the UFC, Bellator, the pinnacle, the top of the sport, right there in your backyard. And it shows that dreams with hard work, dedication, dreams can come true. And what we're seeing now is, and through our government, is the shutting down of those dreams of somebody who's worked their whole life for something. And we're seeing it with this barber in Owasso. We're seeing it and all these other things. And now we've seen it in the news with James Gray of the government saying, hey, you have to put your dreams, your hard work, your life's work, everything you're dedicated for, and you have to put it on hold for what? And that's what we're trying to figure out, for what. And, initially the governor's order, and I can't fault her. And, I always try not to Monday morning quarterback things, but when fear dictates things, and I get it, there's a point where, it makes sense to flatten the curve, to make sure that our resources, if we're understaffed, under beds, don't have ventilators for a coming, an impending pandemic, it absolutely makes sense. But what we've seen since then, and what we're continuing to see now, that the goalpost keeps changing, the rules change. There's no data there supporting those decisions. We have already flattened the curve. The initial decision-making, the initial justifications for these orders aren't there anymore. And that's, deeply upsetting. And I think that's what James has, put out there and showed what the data shows, and making these decisions to open up his gym back up. And just like anything else, you have people out there that are afraid, and I get it. There's a risk, and I've been saying this all the time. No matter what you do, there's a risk. And if the news that propagates this had a death ticker in the corner of car accidents, I think a lot of people wouldn't jump in their cars and be thinking twice about it. Heart disease, cancers, whatever it is, they can propagate that and propagate this fear. And when you look at the data at the end of the day, even with, whether there's inflated numbers or not, in the underlying reasons for that, it doesn't justify the measures that are still in place right now. And when we started this conversation about what are these domino effects, these long-lasting effects to not only our economy and our economic survival as a state, but mental health, physical health. I just read an article of 40% less women are being breast cancer being detected right now. It's not that 40% of less people are getting it. It's being detected because they're not out there getting their routine mammograms and, doctor visits, which means delayed, if they're going to get diagnosed, time is of the essence, especially with cancers. So, and you see it in the statistics now, the mortality and the deaths for all the heart diseases, cancers, all these other things are down, and the COVID deaths are up. And there's on the news this morning, the governor of Colorado was saying how they just adjusted their numbers from, let's say, 1,100 deaths to 800, and asked why. Is they said, well, it's not died of COVID, but with COVID. There's, a differentiation. There's a difference there. And I think that makes a big impact. I've had people and family members who have died recently who happened to have COVID, but they died of cancer. They were dying anyways. They only had a certain amount of time. And I'm wondering, sitting here, are they going to be counted as a COVID death? They probably will be. I think, I guess going on this rant is I'm just as frustrated hearing from it and seeing it. And I would even be more vocal and be out there just like James on the front lines if I wasn't in the position I'm in right now and seeing it and seeing government. But that also frustrates me too, because being an elected representative now, that's the whole point of our country, our democracy, our state, right? We have the separation of powers where Rep Bolin, you're there and you're representing Brighton in your district, a couple away from me. I'm representing my district, and we're going to come together, and I'm going to tell you what I'm hearing. You're going to tell me what you're hearing, why it makes sense to put in a rule, and you're going to be that sounding board, that feedback, like, hey, no, that may be good for Oakland County, but that's not good for Livingston County. And we're going to have these, and that's what typically happens. We don't have a monarchy. We don't have a king that one person makes these decisions without even telling us what's going on. I think, me and Rep Bolin are both on the right side of the aisle, the same side of the aisle, but we don't, just like anybody, you're not going to agree with everybody 100% of the time. And I don't vote along with the caucus all the time, but there's a procedure in place, and it's a duly we have 110 representatives in the state across our entire state, representing districts of just under 100,000 people. But when we put laws in place and we vote on what the policy should be in our state, we're all elected, coming to the table, and maybe I vote no, I get voted out. And in the majority of Michiganders, the majority of districts, the majority of people, that's what they want, and it becomes law. Right now, it's one person, the governor, making these decisions, and it's not an emergency anymore. Okay, I'm not saying there's not an emergency. It's not an emergency to have her act for everybody anymore. Now's the time to and that's why we're in a lawsuit with the governor over separation of powers. And especially when she unilaterally has extended her emergency, when the legislature said no because she wasn't willing to work with us. Now you have these legally dubious orders out there. Whether you agree with them or not, we don't know whether she even has the authority or not. And that's why the sheriff isn't enforcing it. The prosecutors are hesitant. And we have to know, again, going through that process, whether I like a law or not, it's gone through the correct process. Everything was done properly, and everybody knows that's the way, and that's how our Constitution works, and that's how our government is set up. And whether you like the speed limit law or not, you know that it was there and it was duly enacted. These orders right now are not. And that's a big problem. And it's a big problem where people need to know, again, whether they like it or not, that there's a legal foundation and that they were properly put in place. And right now we're not living in that.
So that's true. I echo and share that concern, but the reality is right now the courts are really going to decide that. So I think that for the last several weeks, as much as I disagree with the governor, and I'm going to start by saying public health is a priority, but we also have an obligation to protect the public safety and welfare. We did what we were expected to do initially, was to level the spread. Leveling the spread did not mean we were going to eradicate the virus. It meant that we were going to get our resources, logistics in place so that we would be able to field medical care for those people that caught the virus. It's very contagious. It accelerates at a very quick pace. There were a lot of unknowns, and we have vulnerable populations that are hit harder than others. We have been very successful in doing that. It is amazing how quickly people modified their behavior. But as time goes on, we see that really, as we produce, more data, if you will, it shows we did accomplish that. It shows that people are getting less sick with the virus because they're getting care quicker, or there's not the demand, if you will, for a limited number of ventilators, for example. People are social distancing, so the spread's not. But at some point, it's starting to take its toll, where the consequence of the welfare and the safety of the people is a greater risk than the virus. And when we look at the numbers, I think we also have to look at, we keep hearing from the media again about the rankings. From very early on, Michigan was number 2 or number 3 against New York. We are half the population of New York, and when you look at the numbers are quite a bit different. Even today, while we're 7th in the number of cases roughly, there are 343,000 in New York, 50,000 in the state of Michigan. That is a huge disparity in that. So, that comes back to the fear factor that you mentioned, Rep. Berman, in that I think it's startling to me how the whole story has not been necessarily told. And I find that frustrating. I think the data points also have been moved, the goalpost, as you referenced. When we're looking at first, it was reporting positive cases. And we pointed to and calculated recoveries. And recovery was considered 3 days fever-free. Then it went to 7 days symptom-free, 14 days symptom-free, and now we've stretched out to 30 days. Now, I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that, but I find it quite alarming and concerning that we're looking at now probable cases. Where is the plan? How do we move forward? We cannot stay on lockdown forever. People weren't intended to be locked in their homes. We weren't intended to dictate to businesses when they cannot open, what risks they can take. And I think it's important, and that's why I have been focused not so much on fighting the governor. I think that we have taken that to litigation, and that's going to be fought out in the courts, but really focusing, and I've had 11 virtual roundtables with different business and economic sectors to find out from the business owners. They know best how to operate their businesses, what they can do to safely return responsibly back to how they were operated before. They have a purpose too. A place like a gym certainly seems to me that plays a significant role because it helps people not have some of the underlying causes of being a vulnerable population.
So I want to kind of dissect this thing from a bunch of different angles because you guys obviously have a much different perspective than I do with this. So a couple things that were brought up. Let's start with, having people trust in their governing body and their, elected officials and just the public in general. Like, the ability for us to respond is directly related to the trust that we have in our elected officials. So when we look at Governor Whitmer's actions and the way that she's gone against the legislation, basically the foundation of this country is built upon, the elected officials represent the people, the government gains power from the people, you enact services and processes that are good for the people, and then we in turn have to abide by them, which is a beautiful system if it operates correctly, right? And obviously that's an ideological standpoint and it might not always execute perfectly. But currently with where we are now, because in the beginning I said, hey, I'm all for taking the side of caution. Let's play it as safe as possible. We don't really know what's coming. But with that being said, you have a governor that is directly going against the legislative body, which is, the balance of power is the checks and balances system is something, we learned about as children. It's one of the vital aspects of making this thing successful. So when it first started coming out, I looked at the quarantine laws and I realized that, first of all, the quarantine laws in this country are very bold. It basically says, The governor can promulgate any reasonable thing that she determines would be, good for public safety during those times. But I mean, if you had a very unreasonable person in power, you could then in turn have some unreasonable, regulations. With that being said, where are we currently at with that? What is the next step that takes place? Does that undermine her power at all until the Supreme Court rules one way or another? Or what is the current state of affairs at, regarding that issue? And then we'll look at a couple other aspects of this.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing right now. It's going back to the basics, right? Going back to Schoolhouse Rock, going back to your civics classes. You have our three separate branches of government. You have the legislative branch, the judicial branch, the executive branch. Legislative branch makes the laws. The executive branch is supposed to enforce those laws. The judicial branch interprets the law. So you have an executive, you have the governor as the chief executive officer of the state. And some people business-minded, you can look at it like the legislature is the one that enacts the policy. They're the, board of directors. The governor is the president. So the president still has to, go and do the day-to-day stuff, but it's all enacted of what the board of directors, the direction they want to go in, right? So right now you have in Michigan, and when you're talking about constitutional issues and the whole separation of power, and it's written in our Michigan Constitution, no branch of government shall hold the powers properly belonging to another branch. So that's where we're getting into now. The governor has broad discretion, just like any police officer, right, on the street. They're the executive. They enforce their laws. So if they get you a speeding, they have discretion to let you go, give you a warning, whether it actually enforce that law or not at that basic level. So the executive, especially in a case of an emergency, but even, overall, has discretion and to set out the policy for her departments of whether to strictly enforce certain time limits or laws or things of that nature. Now, what we're getting in the stay-at-home orders and some of these other ones is when she's making law. That's a rule that she's promulgated that has the effect with criminal penalties of a law. So constitutionally, we have a constitutional issue of saying basically the executive shouldn't be able to make laws. Over the years with case law and how courts have interpreted it and their role of interpreting the law says the executive can have certain powers. And that's when you see like administrative agencies making rules. We have the licensing and regulatory affairs and all these, OSHA and all these other departments. If it's clearly defined by the legislature and has, there's specifics, there's oversight, and it's within these specific parameters. And what the legislature did is have two different laws back in 1945 after World War II, and then in 1976, the 45 is the Emergency Powers of Governor Act, and then in 1976 expanded upon that for the Emergency Management Act to give in case, and again, after World War II, to if there's a rioting, there was rioting in Detroit going on, things like that, in case of a localized emergency or disaster, if a county sheriff or the police chief can request an emergency from the governor, or the governor on her own can just declare an emergency in that area to bring about, to quell whatever emergency there is, to have a curfew, limit ingress or egress of buildings, and even any type of foreign invasion. It says it in there. And that's in order, and again, in an emergency situation where the legislature can't, maybe go and convene and act, or until they can. And also is for localized. In 1976, they did the Emergency Management Act that was broader, that actually specifically says in case of pandemics or any type of bigger statewide concerns. And there's more safeguards, oversight, and that's where you get the 28-day time limit, where you have 28 days for the governor to act. Then after 28 days, the governor has to end the emergency, or the legislature can extend it by concurrent resolution. So initially, that's what she did. She declared a state of emergency back in March. On April 7th, 28 days later, we came in, we voted to extend that. She asked for 70 more days of that unilateral executive authority. And we said, nope, 23 days is proper. That coincides with the federal guidelines. We can reassess. That would be April 30th. After we did that, then she renewed her stay home, stay safe order and even made it more restrictive, even though the cases were declining in some of that underlying data. She came back on April 30th and asked again, requested the legislature to extend. She wanted 28 days. They were willing, as a body, we were willing to do so. Our legislative leaders had discussions with her and said, we're willing to do it, but we need to have input on your stay home order, any extension of that, and how it goes. Because over that past 23 days, we have been fighting to loosen up restrictions of outdoor, like construction, fertilizing, landscaping. And there's no rhyme or reason. Some of these things where, oh, you can go fishing, but you can't use a motor on your boat. It makes no sense. You can go walk on a golf course, but you can't use clubs and hit a ball while you're doing it. It just, there's no rhyme or reason. And I would go against that. It's like, this doesn't make sense. The data's in there, doesn't make sense. I get attacked. This thing has become a partisan issue, which it really shouldn't be. And then 2 days later, she does, and she opens it up, and then crickets. I mean, that's what you're kind of seeing now of party. But sorry, I digress. Legally, she wanted it extended. We said we wanted input. She said no. She wants it's her way or the highway. We decided not to extend it, the emergency, because of that. She did it on her own unilaterally. Now we filed a lawsuit in the Court of Claims, which is if you have a claim against the state of Michigan, you file in the Court of Claims. It was heard on oral arguments were on Friday morning. It's on YouTube link. You can see it. It's out there. There was, I think, 7,000 people watching live as it was happening. So there's a lot of interest in this, obviously. It was great arguments. I think it went well. And we're expecting a ruling by the Court of Claims judge by mid next week. But even as she recognized, this is going to the Supreme Court. Either we win, we like it, or we lose. One side or the other is taken to the Supreme Court. So it's ultimately going to end up there, obviously on an expedited schedule. But that's, again, the separation of powers. Two of co-equal branches are fighting whether they could, I guess, if you will, if the governor has overstepped her authority statutorily and constitutionally, and it's going to be up to the judiciary to determine it. But yeah, it brings up a lot of questions of the status of her orders after that date right now, and the nature of criminal enforcement. I don't know if you want me to get more into it, like the legal issues.
No, that was really good. I just anytime after you answer, I just wanted to be quiet so that if Ann had something that she wanted to put in, I don't jump over her. Obviously, this is way more of your guys' life and your expertise than mine. I just had some questions. That's the beginning one was, where are we at? What happens next? I figured that it would be appealed and that there's going to be a process, and it puts us kind of in a difficult situation as business owners and people, good citizens in the community, trying to figure out, do we do this? Do we listen to this? It's very up in the air right now, because I would think that the 76 should supersede the 45 order, because it was more in detail. It went into the pandemics. It said, hey, to have our checks and balances, we need this 28-day approval process. So the second that wasn't the case, how do you have someone that just extends it? I don't know. And hopefully the judicial system can work through that. But Ann, was there anything you wanted to add to that before I go to another angle?
No, it seems as though it should be very simple, and unfortunately it's not simply put. And it is because there is the very broad language in the first act and the reference in the second act to the first one that we cannot be more restrictive. But we are, I think we've got top-notch legal counsel, and this is the hand we've been dealt with. I just would say that even though this is going on, it does not mean that the legislature does not have business to take care of nor does it mean that the governor doesn't have other business to take care of. And one of the most significant things is the budget and the concern for, the welfare of the state and the state budget. So, we are working, certainly responding to constituents, and also working on, what's ahead for us.
No, absolutely. Great point, Ann. I mean, that's, one of the things you see with the governor of talking about this emergency and how the economic impact of it. It's really not it's the economic impact of her policies and of this stay-at-home order and of these false dichotomy of essential versus non-essential businesses. It, again, going back to, it should be what can be done safely or not safely, but even now knowing the risks. Again, when we're talking about, let's say, a martial arts studio, you go in there, I can break my knee, break my leg, break my arm, get a concussion. I can do all that. A lot of people wouldn't be willing to risk that. I am, right? I like to do it. I like to wrestle. I like that, but it's obviously a risk. I've been injured many times doing martial arts, but you sign a waiver. And now we're talking about going to restaurants, signing waivers, going to any type of business, signing waiver, because knowing that there is this risk out there. And it's whether if you feel safe. And again, we can have no orders that maybe the Supreme Court says, yeah, this is wrong. And then we have time to fix it. But what happens in the meantime? We saw what happened in Wisconsin last week. They lifted the order. The Supreme Court said, hey, you can't do this. Bars were packed the next day. I think some people are willing to do that. I think the vast majority, and we've seen some polling from, Main Street and businesses and how businesses are going to operate moving forward. A lot of people aren't going to feel safe doing that. And I think that's what makes America and the free market system what we are. If you feel safe going somewhere, you go there. If you don't, you stay home or you don't go. Some gyms are much more cleanly, and you're not going to get ringworm at one because they're cleaning their mats versus another gym. And it's that customer, it's their choice ultimately whether to go and do that or not. So when you're talking about the economy and what's happening here, I think it's these orders that, again, are forcing businesses to close. And I think businesses are going to have a hard time opening up regardless. And when you're talking about what is going to happen to our budget and these budget shortfalls, especially what I've been hearing now from the school lobby, always in education, which is a big issue, they have dedicated funding in the school aid fund that primarily comes through the sales tax. When there are no sales, there's no sales tax. So there's no money coming in. It's not that I or Rep. Bolin wants to cut budgets or slash the school aid fund. Not at all. I think it's one of our priorities. There's no money coming in. There's no sales. You actually just led to a perfect next part of the discussion that I wanted to bring up. So there's all these proposed regulations and rules and social distancing and, hey, maintain this distance, find a new way to operate your business at half capacity, or there's so many things being thrown around right now. But all of these should be based on intelligent, reasoning, logic, and to match the threat, right? So when we look at coronavirus overall, I feel like our biggest inquisition should be, what is the actual threat of this virus? Because all of our response is going to be based on that. So now you alluded to things earlier in this conversation where you said, currently in the state of Michigan, I don't know if we still are, but at one point we were classifying anyone at the time of death that dies with coronavirus as a COVID-19 death. Now, obviously, that is not dying from COVID-19. If you were to shoot me, if I was to die in a car accident, if heart disease killed me, cancer, stroke, COPD, anything of that nature, that shouldn't be fact. If you want to record how many people died with COVID, that's fine. But that number would have no value when you were trying to determine what type of rules and regulations should we put into place moving forward, because we have to determine how much of a threat does this thing cause. Like, as you know, we'll only talk about the flu for a second, but a seasonal influenza in America can kill 60, 70, up to 80,000 people in a season. The 2017 to 2018 influenza season is estimated to have hospitalized just under 1 million, with 60 to 80,000 deaths. Now, obviously, we can do things better for our health. We can do things better as a community. We can educate our people to be more intelligent. But
if we're going to implement these rules and regulations and telling, restaurants, hey, you have to operate in this fashion, gyms, you have to operate in this fashion, the threat has to match, the logic that's being applied. So with that being said, we're looking at coronavirus. We're heavily inflating statistics. We're not taking into account antibody tests that have happened across the nation that show that millions more people have been infected with this. We're not using the vital details to create proper perspective, but then off the initial fear response, we're still driving actions, policies, regulations, all these things. Because if you wound the clock back, the initial response was that there was apocalyptic thing coming. I mean, the UK, the London Imperial Model said, hey, up to 2.2 million Americans will die from this if you don't take action. And then it transferred down to, okay, with action, maybe 200,000. And then it went down to like a seasonal flu level. With that being said, we have to make perspective. So I went further into that, gentleman. I said, okay, obviously, if we're going to trust a Neil Ferguson out of the London, Imperial Model, who is this guy? Obviously, he's an expert. Our media, this is the number one source that was telling us 3 to 10% mortality rate, which, honestly, if there's a 3 to 10% mortality rate, widely infectious disease coming to the population, you need to take precautions, right? So with that being said, Neil Ferguson predicted that on bird flu, up to 200 million people were going to die, and not even 10,000 did. He made predictions for swine flu. He made predictions for mad cow. He made predictions for foot and mouth disease, and they were not even within the realm of reasonable. They weren't even close. So I'm not saying our initial actions were bad, because I did the same thing as you guys. I shut my gym down. I quarantined. I completely closed everything off. I said, hey, I'm going to go to work on this thing. Is it worse than what they're telling us? Is it better? Is it exactly what they're saying? We need to play it safe. But now at this point, there is so much data and information in front of us, but we are not adjusting our plan of action. Now, maybe you are, Ryan, and maybe you are, Ann, and you're trying to say, hey, let's attack this thing intelligently. But many governors, ours included, are still operating as if this is this world apocalyptic virus that if we don't maintain 6 feet apart and wash our hands every 15 minutes, our loved ones are going to die. Like, that is still the perception. Why are we not? That was hypothetical. That was play it safe. That was the initial motion. Why are we not taking data, information, looking at how COVID deaths are being reported, looking at, this threat to children is virtually zero. The threat to young, healthy adults is virtually zero. Less than a bad influenza. With that being said, the miracle of herd immunity and things are what has kept our species moving forward for eons. And yet we are not wanting our healthy kids and adults to develop the barrier that will save millions of lives. I don't understand this aspect of it. Why not create the actual threat of the virus, get it in front of us, and then determine what is appropriate action for COVID-19?
So I agree with you. I don't have a real good connection. So if I go in and out, I'm sorry. I had to turn off my video. It seems to be a little
problem at all.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and that's a big concern about the data. But I will tell you that the legislature is not receiving the same information, apparently, that the governor has. The governor has stated that in her press conferences, that we don't have the information she has. However, I think that the legislature is astute and resourceful. I can speak for myself and confidently speak for my colleagues that we all seek out research, data, etc. And certainly, in the beginning, it was unknown. But we have come so far in 10 weeks, and even the information that was before us, even before we made these decisions, right? Things surfaced last fall, late in 2019. So here we are in 2020. We're heading into our summer months. The legislature doesn't really have a hand in the decision making. However, I do think we can have some influence on the change. And that's where we need people like you to step forward and to raise the questions, raise the concerns, and present plans and the reality of how we can move forward. So one of the things that has come about is the legislature established an oversight committee to look at the state's response on this. And that committee started meeting about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and they meet weekly at least, if not more. And they are fully charged with looking at the state's response to COVID-19, including the data. I have a very large concern about, all right, if we're going to have to plan for another pandemic, now that we have that, if we have not recorded data properly and consistently, we have lost any future hope of trying to react to one, plan for one. All right, and there have been a number, I don't think they're intentional, but missteps. When you start changing the data points, when you start moving Livingston County, for example, into a different region, we were counting the data, the testing, the positive cases, the deaths, etc., for Livingston County in one region. And then all of a sudden, 2-3 weeks ago, the governor decides to put us in another region. Now, how does all that data transfer? I don't know. These are the questions, though, that have got to be asked, and the Oversight Committee, in my opinion, is a very good avenue to get those questions answered. It still doesn't resolve it. It doesn't still fix us for, where we've been and where we're going to go. But we are going to have full intention of trying to evaluate how we have reacted to this and prepare for what's next. And when I say prepare for what's next, that doesn't mean just another pandemic. That means allowing people to get back to their everyday business in this great country of the United States of America. And that means letting people freely choose how they move about, how they do their
that's
business.
Wonderful to hear, to be honest, because that's the freedom. I've traveled all over the world. I've been to rural China multiple times. I've seen the living conditions over there. And there's a lot of my generation that is not very grateful for living in this country. They look around and they say, oh, America should be this or should be that. If you travel around the world and you see the way that I've seen the favelas in Brazil. I've been to Brazil multiple times. I've seen how people live in rural China. It is absolutely brutal. Those people have lifestyles that, kids here can't even imagine. And it's good to hear our representatives saying, listen, we need to make sure we're being intelligent with our actions. So referring to that committee, is that a committee that regular members like business owners or people in the population can interact with in any way? Or is this just a closed group that was selected to try to, discuss our actions? Because I have multiple doctors, ICU nurses, actually a couple people that I can't believe the stature that they have or how high up, some of the heads of Beaumont and St. Joe's, that once I started to speak out publicly, they started to reach out to me and say, hey, I could lose my career if I come forward with this information, but you've compiled a lot of information and I'm going to pass some things along to you. And some of the things that have been moved along to me, like I have been waiting to get them to the right source. But with that being said, like our media in this country, I hate to say it, but they put a certain spin on most of the stories that they report. They want you to draw a certain conclusion. It's like suggestive thinking or controlled opposition. They want you to come to a certain conclusion. And I'm just sitting here trying to say, okay, looking at all the facts and all the data and everything involved in this pandemic, we need to be intelligent, because like my sport, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, close contact things, these couldn't exist if you bought into the story that there's a 3 to 10% mortality rate virus. You're going to make these, restaurants have regulations. You're going to tell a salon they can only have, let's just hypothetically say 5 people in, they have to maintain this distance. I'm going to be physically holding someone down, sweating on them, breathing on them, and competing in sports, which we've done, since the dawn of time. So we need to be intelligent about what is the actual threat. And I feel like I compiled an unbelievable resource of information using the CDC death reporting, and then more importantly, firsthand accounts. I have people from Sparrow, St. Joe's, Beaumont, and I don't know how to get this information to the right people, which is probably why I'm sitting here today talking to people like, you and Ryan, saying, look, I want to be part of the solution. I never want to be anything but a good supporting citizen in my community. I want to try to take more action. I do as much as I can locally, but I didn't really have the, intelligence before to reach out to our elected officials and say, hey, please let me know how we can help. How can we do a better job together? So is that something that someone like me can be involved in? Can I get information to the right people? What would you suggest, Ann or Ryan?
So first of all, I want to thank you for your investment in the community and also for the greater good. Like you clearly are very passionate about this, and I think it's really important. And I'm very grateful that you're willing to step forward, because so many people are not willing to. and or they just have suffered through this and just think like, oh, this is the way it's going to be. So the Oversight Committee is an open committee. It is a bipartisan, bicameral committee. And one of our colleagues, Matt Hall, is chairing that committee. And he will be taking testimony over the next weeks, months, however long it takes. And the agenda, more or less, is set by him by what is the topic. So unemployment seems to be crippled right now, the system, right? We've had 3 overhauls with the system, this great investment of money, human capital, and it still is not working. And so trying to get at that. But certainly through your own representative, you can share information is great, and then also directly to Rep Hall.
So are you my representative, being at a business owner here in Brighton and Livingston County? Are you mine? Or actually, I live in Fowlerville. So is Hank Vocal my representative?
Yeah, so Fowlerville would be Rep Hank Valpel. And I am on the southeast side of Livingston County, so the greater Brighton area. But I can assure you, and I can certainly arrange for some sort of connection with Rep Valpel. It doesn't mean even if you're not in our district, we don't want to fight for you.
Yeah, of course.
We want to make sure always that, the rep is aware, whoever is representing you, that we can all be partners in this. And certainly I think you can count on Rep Berman and myself, and I'm pretty confident to say that Rep Valpel, who's always been a very good partner, also would be very open to listening to your story and seeing how we can get it in front of the right person. I would also encourage you that we also need to make sure that we are conveying the information to the governor. And I say that because this is not, in my opinion, a partisan issue or a political issue. This is about people, and this is about principles. And unfortunately, the media, and I think our governor, have turned it into a very partisan, unnecessarily issue. And it is about the people of Michigan and our principles and what's at stake here. So anything that you would send to any one of us, I would strongly encourage that it be copied to the governor's office as well.
Well, you know what I'll actually do? That I'll put together everything in like a text and a cited format, and I can even, I can compile all the information into maybe like a well-written email, and I can, send that to you, send that to Ryan, send that to Hank, and then possibly directly forward it right to the state attorney general and the governor, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to do the right thing in a difficult time, and I found myself in the middle of the spotlight in the wrong way, you know what I mean? Basically,
yeah. Challenging. Yep. And we certainly don't want to forget, I wouldn't, certainly the Attorney General is one option, but I think what we want to make sure is that this oversight committee is looking at it.
Oh, 100%.
Because they will look at it with a different lens. I think they will be looking at it with a lens, not from black and white letter of the law, and the Attorney General is one that has to defend the governor.
No, of course, I understand that.
Right? And the House of Representatives is the House of the people. And I think that the Oversight Committee would be one that would be very receptive also to the information.
One thing that's stressed me out during this entire event too is like I said, I can 100% support that the initial thing was, hey, let's take caution. I back that 1,000%. I quarantine myself. My girlfriend has an autoimmune disorder. I so support trying to do the right thing by people. But once we have so much information about, like I said, it's not really a threat to young, healthy kids or adults. We see the common denominators in the people that it is attacking. We have all this information. We have enough in front of us. I mean, throughout history, we quarantine the people that are high risk. You know what I mean? We're like, hey, these people, you might have to take extra precautions. You might want to wear a mask. You may want to distance yourself. But like when we're still to this date, it's the middle of May, we're still not doing the things that even just pure science backs. I mean, we have an immune system. Our immune systems, B cells and T cells, absolutely produce antigens. They develop immunity from a virus. These are things that are scientifically known without question. I still am struggling to understand why now, in our current state, not from where we were, with everything in front of us, and let's be honest, with decades of research into coronaviruses. I understand this was a novel case. This is a new coronavirus, but like coronavirus has been around since the 60s, or we've been aware of them since the 60s. They were probably around before that. So if you compiled all your information together at this point, you could list antibody testing, you could do, mortality rate intelligently. You could look at so many different aspects of this, and you could paint a much better picture. And then if you looked at that picture and you compared it to our initial picture, they're so incredibly far different, but yet our response, at least our governor, is still pushing, if not more restrictions than we initially took place. I'm struggling to understand why me, as a American who backs my legislation, backs people like you, I'm proud to live in a community where we are trying to take action, like the sheriff, it spoke out publicly against the EO. I back all of these things, but at what point do we just almost demand, if you do not use the current data information, we will not comply at all, because it's not based on science. Young, healthy adults and children should absolutely be developing an immune response. If you social distance, you are more likely going to slow down that response than not. Our immune system does strengthen by interacting with germs. This is basic science knowledge. So why are we putting things in place that is going to stop those things?
So, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head again. And you see kind of what we've already been talking about of changing the goalpost or changing, this thing. And all these issues are intertwined, right? Talking about this oversight committees being the people's chamber, having a deliberative process, open hearings, whenever we're going to change a law, implement a law, where we're the people's representatives. You're able to come here, testify, and this is all done in a deliberative manner. And the governor is just doing it alone. Okay?
So we just need to get the people together to go to those committees. We need to get them educated.
Well,
we need to get them informed.
It's not even that, though. This is the problem, and that's why our government was set up for having this deliberative process to pass laws, and only having the governor to have an ability to act in an emergency in a limited manner under a certain time period. It's now beyond that, right? So that's what you're saying. Initially, all right, okay, put an order in, let's see what happens. Now it's gone on. It was the 28 days, another 23 days, and now she's trying to do it even more than that. And we say, look at the data. And as Rep Bolin said, I've been requesting data. We've been requesting this data. We have not been getting it from our administration. In fact, we only started to get some data directly from the Michigan Hospitals Association, basically intercepting it from them before they could pass it on to the Governor Whitmer's administration.
Wow.
The data doesn't support this stuff. And if it did, she should be transparent and show that. And she hasn't. And she said, oh, the legislature, they don't have the data I do. So that begs the question. One is, why don't we have the data? And two is, why aren't you sharing your data then?
Why are we not on a team in a pandemic? Why are we not on a team in a pandemic when, like you said, Ann said it, this is not a partisan issue. This is this is a livelihood issue.
Because and I haven't said this in especially in the district that I'm in. I'm in a 50-50 type district. They're trying to come after me to get control of the House. I more moderate. But the fact of the matter is I always tell the truth, and Governor Whitmer is as partisan as they come. And if she can use the claim of saving lives as the priority, but have the secondary benefits of advancing agenda with the base when it's all about power, money, and control, that's what's going on here. So she gets to have the cover of say, hey, it's saving lives, and then go on with her agenda, and whether it's trying to become the vice presidential candidate, trying to use this to take down Trump, trying to take this Republicans, whatever that is, she thinks that's going to help her. Okay. But it's going to backfire on her because people are smart and they're going to look and say, no, it wasn't the disease. It wasn't all this stuff. It was you and what you did that crippled our economy, that crippled these businesses, crippled our livelihoods, crippled our future, and the data wasn't there. Again, the whole thing is not to stop this virus. There's no stop to it. Okay. It was to flatten the curve.
Exactly.
The curve is flattened. It's as flat as you can get right now looking at it, the daily numbers. There's always going to be, we don't want a second wave. There's always going to be a second wave. But again, with the knowledge that people have now, the hygiene, I'm not going to say so, the physical distancing, okay, the doing things properly, that's all necessarily going to impact the numbers and the effects of a second wave. There's going to be a second wave once you release stuff. So if you're not releasing anything, you can say you're trying to prevent a second wave. there has to be a release on these measures. You can't keep everybody in their homes forever.
100%.
Absolutely. And
So I
we
guess-
are likely to have some sort of a rebound. We knew that when we prepared, when we leveled the spread. It's a matter of what kind of rebound will it be? Will it be a U rebound? Will it be a W rebound? You know, we don't know. We're seeing it kind of being more like possibly a W rebound, if you will. So it kind of goes down, up again. All right. We have been threatened that we will not reopen until either we start behaving ourselves better or there's a vaccine.
I know that's madness.
That is madness, and I quite agree with you. And that just shows you how partisan and punitive the actions have been, and they are not in the best interest of the people and our most vulnerable populations. They're not. But it is important that we continue to really fight for what we have left and what the priorities are here. We have a $6.2 billion deficit in the state budget alone. The administration's answer to that is that we have to go to the federal government. We need more money. All right. I do think that people would be more willing to look at the data, to take and assume more of a risk if they were not getting a paycheck through the government right now. And
Absolutely.
at some point,
Absolutely.
those paychecks, that bill will come due. And it's going to be at a much greater cost than it is to shut down our economy for going on 3 months.
100%. I only have two last things, and then anything else you guys want to say. So, in terms, you just brought up a good point in the rebound, right? The rebound would only be if you believe that our lockdowns actually had an effect and that we greatly stopped the spread of this virus. But then, if you were to look at a place like Sweden, for example, because we've been saying, hey, there's not really treatment for this virus, but that's kind of basic virology, right? Like, you don't treat viruses in most instances. You provide the body what it needs. Your immune system responds. You produce antigens. You cure yourself from the virus. Like when you were little and grandma gave you chicken noodle soup because you just have to fight the virus. Anyway, Sweden is a population of just over 10 million people. And Michigan is a population of just under 10 million people, right? Like those statistics are very, very close. Yep. With that being said, Sweden put almost no lockdown into effect. They did incredibly small measures very late into their fight against COVID. And in reality, compared to us, did the furthest side to one, and we went the opposite. They let it widely spread through their population, which everybody said is going to spike your death rates. You're going to kill all these people, but then, you'll achieve herd immunity much quicker and it'll be deadly for a much shorter period. With that being said, the state of Michigan has more recorded deaths from COVID than the entire country of Sweden. Now, obviously, there are different health issues and things like that, but that tells us something. Either it's widespread in Michigan, we have horrible health conditions here, or herd immunity was not a bad choice, because with herd immunity, even let's say it would increase the threat by a small amount, we wouldn't create the countless other damages and all the things that we've been speaking about, the unemployment, the destroyed businesses, the poverty that's going to come from this, the deficit that is going to be on our hands. All of these things came with our actions, as Andrea said. This was because of our response. Sweden allowed it to go through the country. They've already published they're going to reach herd immunity in a very short period, and they have less deaths than the state of Michigan. So if there is not a second wave, that would say that our lockdown was not very effective at all. The virus still spread regardless, and yet we now have a Christmas list of long, damages done because of our actions. We're on a slippery slope for every day that we go by that we don't look at the data and we don't try to be intelligent. We're just increasing those damages that we're speaking about now that I'm concerned about. Because the question I guess I wanted to ask you guys you can address that Sweden remark is, what is coming next for this country? You see it from more of an inner working process than I do, but I can't think things are good, coming down the pipe when I know over 35 million people are on unemployment. The Great Depression was what? Like 15 million in 1933. Now, obviously, the population of the world was smaller and we have benefits right now. But what about when these benefits run out? What about when deferred payments are all due? What about when all these jobs are now gone forever? Businesses have been absolutely destroyed because of this route that we took. And especially when you find out this route may not have been intelligent at all or backed by science. How are we going to justify these things?
I think, I mean, you're absolutely, again, I mean, that's the thing. And I think Trump said it back a month ago. We don't want the cure, if you will, to be worse than the disease, and all these policies being put in place. Again, without Monday morning quarterbacking the initial response, that's when we had time to look at the numbers, look at the data. But when we're talking about 60 days later now, and this is still ongoing, and you're looking at other states that have less restrictions and much less deaths and things like that, again, it's one of those things of it's not necessary. And I think people, anybody that is saying they're afraid or, oh, they're still getting paid. And in much cases, they're making more money than they were if they're going back to work. So everybody who's still saying they don't want to go back to work, or they are still afraid, or that, I think there's those two separate issues, but you have to look at the motivations and why somebody's saying that. And is maybe a different perspective of a business owner versus not. Going back to the basics, though, is, again, why was this done in the first place? Why did we shut things down? It was to flatten the curve because they were afraid that they would have to ration care and people would be dying in the streets and not getting that care.
Now we have elective surgeries that aren't even being addressed. I mean, you have, and if you look at what the term elective means in medical care, a lot of people that desperately need medical care are not receiving it.
Right. So you had the TCF Center in Detroit. You had the Suburban Collection in Novi. 1,000-bed facilities for overflow. Nobody even used it. Less than 20 people in TCF. And that was only the hospital system there wasn't over capacity. It was just for convenience that they sent some patients over
Beaumont Wayne closed in the middle of the pandemic for weeks because they couldn't even keep people in, and the hospitals laid off thousands of people, Ryan.
Correct. That's the problem. You're looking at, we have 80% of the cases in Michigan are in this, in our southeast area in the Tri-County region. And at the height of it, I think the data shows, I think the one hospital system is broken down by hospital system where I saw maybe was at 89% capacity. The other ones were at 60%. Again, that was in the height of this in the beginning. And now with these orders, you either have to have a total lockdown or no lockdown, really, because you do a total lockdown, that's what stops it. And that's everybody's lockdown. Nobody can leave, whether it's 14, 30 days. And if you do that, you would kill more people than if you did a no lockdown, is the problem. People will be dying from all these other reasons, from whether or not getting food, all that. When now you have a partial lockdown is what we really do, this whole essential versus non-essential, it's still those same areas, the grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations. Those are
go to McDonald's. And
everywhere that you, anybody would end up diverging anyways. It's not at your gym. It's not at some random business the general public going to. It's all at those choking points anyways. And you see the governor kept saying, oh, at the gas station, because of the gas stations, we don't want people who are non-essential at the gas stations and to touch a pump that maybe an important doctor would touch. I think people are smart enough to wear a glove at the gas station or wash their hands after touching such a high traffic area. It's really insulting to everybody. I think every Michigander should be insulted by the governor's remarks for that and that excuse to continue lockdown measures because of the gas station and not wanting people to go to the pump. Guess what, Governor? People are still going to the pump, whether they can buy an essential item at a store or not. What's the difference when she had this of, oh, you can buy an item out of aisle A, but not out of aisle B? Well, people that are bored are going shopping. Well, they'll go bored and they'll shop for essential items then.
Meanwhile, I mean, in parts of the country, you have people letting out violent and sexual offenders out of prison. They kept a serial killer in Washington in prison by one vote. So this is not based on reason, and that's, I guess, why I was so frustrated. That's why I am so passionate. You just brought up so many good points, Ryan. There's so many things that just don't match logic and reason. You know what I mean? And when we start getting away from that, it's very hard to follow it. So I don't want to take any more of your guys' time, but I'm going to only ask like one final thing here is just, with where we're currently at, right? People like me in my situation, I chose to open my business and move forward and try to get back my life on track. I'm nervous that I know how powerful the government is and how powerful that issues can be when they gain a lot of publicity. What action, I guess, if you guys can even speak on this, is possible to come against me for openly defying these orders when if our governor was to win against you guys let's say the Supreme Court, and they say, no, absolutely, we're going to back. I mean, I'm just hypothetically speaking here. Am I going to, end up in prison because I stood up for something that straight across the board was based on very little logic?
I think that the answer, or maybe some of the answer to the question you're looking for, I'll talk to you offline.
I understand.
Maybe that's for as an attorney, some legal advice there.
No, I understand. Yeah,
I think,
I don't want legal advice. I'm just saying, what a difficult time to navigate. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm trying to be a good citizen. I want to get involved in those communities that Ann spoke about. I want to help my people. I want to help our future. I mean, we're living in a time where we're going to need people like you more than ever. I mean, currently, we live in an era now where the First Amendment is under attack. You can say social media is how we pretty much all interact, and yet I put out a video where I expressed my opinions on why I was forced to open my business during this pandemic, and it got taken off YouTube because it violates their guidelines. Well, if we have corporations that own all the ways that we communicate, do those corporations not have to follow the First Amendment given to the people of the country they operate in? We have a lot of issues coming up down the pipe that we're going to need people like you fighting for us.
Yeah, you know what? And those are major issues of when you're talking whether you're a platform. And again, those are some legal considerations and federal laws that provide protection for, use of what somebody posts on their content. When they start becoming a publisher versus a platform, and when they are censoring or removing stuff, it puts more on them. They can't have it both ways. So that's another issue I think we're going to end up looking at.
I mean, you can have porn online. You can have every conspiracy theory in the world online. You can have the Westboro Baptist Church online. But me saying, given the data, given the information, given firsthand witness accounts, this is why I am making a very difficult decision. That's censored and removed. And then the companies can decide what information we're allowed to see. The experts have been wrong throughout this entire process. So what if you censor something in January, you take down very pertinent, important information, and then in March that information is vital. This is a very mad time we're entering.
No, you're right. And I think that shows the, necessity to have competing platforms or having other platforms that won't do that and won't be as, I guess leftist, if you will, because we've seen that in the last couple of years of YouTube and Facebook and others silencing more of the conservative movement, some of the right stuff. And you would see people having to post videos, including like Prager University, anti-abortion videos, things like that they would have to post and they would have to host on Pornhub because Pornhub doesn't have restrictions. So you have literally education videos and things like that, legitimate stuff, and even like policy or politics on Pornhub.
Yeah, man. You know what? I don't envy you guys. You're in a heck of a struggle coming up, but I tell you what, you are appreciated way more than you realize because we didn't have people fighting for us. Who knows where this country is heading? I appreciate very much you both taking the time to talk to me today. I guess anything else that you possibly want to say on the video? I want you to know, like, we appreciate you now more than ever. There may be some people that are ungrateful. There may be some people that think that there's corruption straight across the board. I still believe there's good people like you fighting for us, and that's a huge, huge importance in this society.
Thank you, appreciate it. And Rep Bolin, she's a great one. It's a pleasure for me to get to know her over the last year and a half, and that's one of the great benefits of having this and people from all across the state coming together. And I know she's been there in Brighton and the clerk there and involved for years, and I'll let Rep Bolin close out, but I'm really glad I was able to, be colleagues with her and have her join us today.
Thank you, Ryan. It is a great privilege to serve you, and I would say it is a great honor to serve in the legislature, and it's one that I don't take lightly. But I want to tell you that one of the reasons what motivated me to run for the legislature was the decisions made in Lansing do not stay in Lansing. They come back to Main Street. They come back to our families, our businesses, our neighbors, our friends. And I think it is extremely important that wherever we are, that we are all standing up. Nobody is essential or non-essential. We're all equal. We receive equal protections under the law, and we all have the right to our life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so I want to make sure that you can make your business happen, be successful, take care of your loved ones, have your freedom of speech. And sometimes, the fights come with consequences, but this is definitely one worth fighting for.
Well, I tell you what, that's the American spirit that I grew up and believed in. And when I was a young kid, I thought this country was the greatest in the world. And I still believe it has the potential for being the greatest in the world if it's not up there already. I think we do need to do better. We need to treat each other with love and respect. We need to get rid of, outdated, crazy things like racism and nonsense. But with that being said, like, this America is worth fighting for. And the people that are trying to destroy it are, there are people out there that are not moving this needle in the direction of a good future for our culture. So thank you so much. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you guys talking with me very much. And please, if there's ever anything that I can do, reach out. And maybe once we get off the call, you guys can pass along that information about that, committee. I would love to speak with them more in detail. I have many, like I said, doctors and nurses, and even someone right under an executive of a local hospital willing to speak up. So hopefully we can piece this thing together and try to move in a good direction.
Sounds great.
Well, thank you
All
guys.
right,
so
thank
much.
you.
I appreciate it. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you again.
All right. Take
Yeah,
care.
you too. Have a good Sunday.
Take care.